Hi, I'm Tiffany.
And I'm Rihanna, and welcome back to Fresh Off the Broke.
Fresh Off the Broke is about personal experiences growing up Asian American in a predominantly white community, Asian media, and Asian pop culture in general. Race has always been a sensitive topic. Every day there are debates over race. With our podcast, we intend to shed light on the experiences of first-generation Asian immigrants, not put them on a pedestal.
We understand that race isn't everything, but there should be an acknowledgement of people of color, the knowledge gap, and the racial divide that will ideally be broken. Now that that's out of the way, let's get into the episode. Today's topic is #JustAsianCanadianThings. And by the way, it's not actually a hashtag. We should make it a real one though.
Yes, we should start that hashtag. We should trend it on Twitter or something after this episode.
Guys, use the hashtag, please.
You know what? If you trend it on Twitter, we'll make a Twitter. that's our deal for today.
Yeah.
So trend #JustAsianCanadianThings on Twitter, and we'll make a Twitter. Fresh Off the Broke will be fresh off the tweet. I don't know.
God.
That was a bad joke. Anyway, to kick off our episode, I want to first announce something. And by announce something, I don't mean that it's like we have a big announcement as a podcast, but it's just something nice within the community. So, Project 1907, a nonprofit organization that's working towards stopping Asian hate crime, has launched a partnership with Gofundme, and there is now a Stop Asian Hate, Support Asian Canadians Fund. Yay! So far they've raised over $15,000.
That's crazy.
Mm-hmm. And so that will be linked in the description. Please check it out and share. And also, if you have the means to, donate.
Yeah. Even a little bit helps.
Yeah.
So we've done an episode pretty similar to this, which was episode 11, and it was about Asian Canadian history, but today's more of a laid-back conversation rather than a historical one. And we're just going to talk about some Asian Canadian things we enjoy or enjoyed as kids.
Mm-hmm. And the reason why we're doing this is because in terms of the quote-unquote Asian diaspora, Asian Canadians are the lesser known and lesser talked about group compared to Asian Americans, which is usually the umbrella term, Asian Australians, and even European Asians, especially British Asians. I see a lot of those accounts on Instagram. No hate. We love everyone from the diaspora. This is just our effort to spotlight Asian Canadians, since we ourselves are Asian Canadians. And some people tend to think we're American, which is okay. It's perfectly okay. We just want to highlight our Asian Canadianness. That makes sense.
I think it's mainly because Asian Canadians are often just lumped in with America, just like how Canadians are lumped in with Americans just in general, you know? Yeah.
And I mean, in a sense, when people refer to North America as a continent, some people just say America.
Yeah.
So, growing up, when was the first time you really saw or started paying attention to Asian Canadians?
I think, personally, I grew up watching, it started off watching TV a little bit, and then I started watching a lot of YouTube. So, I think the first experience I would say that I was, like, conscious enough to realize was, so there's a TV show, or TV channel rather, called YTV. And one of the hosts on that show was a guy named Carlos, and he was Filipino.
I remember him.
Yes, the GOAT, Carlos. And my mom, whenever I was watching YTV, he would always like be talking in between shows. And every time he showed up, my mom would be like, Carlos, look, it's Carlos. And I was like, do you know him? Like, why are you pointing him out every single time? And she'd be like, no, he's Filipino. Like, look, there's a Filipino guy on TV. It's Carlos. And ever since then, I've just been like, whenever I watch YTV and I see Carlos, I'd be like, look, it's Carlos. He's Filipino. And obviously, he's not really working for YTV anymore. He now works at ET Canada, which, good for him. But yeah, he was a pretty big part of my childhood, just seeing another Filipino guy on TV. That was pretty cool.
Yeah, I can say he was probably my first exposure to Asian Canadians, or like you said, a conscious realization.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, as a kid, I didn't know he was Filipino. That was more of something I realized later on. But
Mm-hmm.
growing up, when I saw him, I thought to myself, yo, that guy looks like me, or someone
Mm-hmm.
that could be connected to me in a way. And I don't mean connected like, oh, all Asians are related. But when you see someone that looks like you, there's a connection. Kind of like how your mom saw him. Was like, yo, it's Carlos. He's
Yeah.
Filipino. What I think is so cute, because the thing with people of color is that when they see people on screen, like maybe an actor or a host or something, and it's someone from their ethnic group or from their community, they get really excited.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like, yo, look, it's a insert ethnicity person.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, yo. And we don't
Shout.
even know, and we don't even know the person, but
Mm-hmm.
there's like an instant connection.
Very wholesome.
hmm And going back to what you said about YouTube, I mean, a couple of really prominent Asian Canadian YouTubers were, I Superwoman I, Lily Singh,
Mm-hmm.
and Lena D Productions. And growing up, those were, like we said in the Asian YouTubers videos, one of the, in a sense, OG or like big YouTubers in general, right?
Mm-hmm. Superwoman. Wow, why did I say it like that? Superwoman. Sorry.
I think you're trying to say ooh.
Oh God, no. No, Superwoman. It was interesting because I would watch her videos, and then sometimes she would like be outside, and I'd be like, wait, it looks familiar where she is. Like, it's in Toronto. Oh, also, just in general, like, I grew up with a lot of people from South Asia, so they would always like, whenever like watching Superwoman was cool to see with my friends because it was like, hey, look, they can relate to her video specifically.
Yeah, she had the Brown Parents series, right? The whole My
Yeah.
Parents React or
hmm
skits in general with her parents.
Yeah, like I think we can both say that those videos were also kind of relatable, but like specifically to my friends who were also from the same area that she was from, like they could
Mhm.
really relate to it, which was cool.
Yeah, and going back to what you said about seeing familiar locations, I knew people that had met her before or bumped into her before in
Mm-hmm.
Toronto. So that was cool.
Ooh, also another show, more recent now. So I'm sure people are familiar with Blue's Clues,
Yes.
the childhood
Childhood.
show. And they've, I don't think it was a reboot. I think they just changed the host.
hmm
And the new host is Filipino. And I remember a lot of people were kind of, I guess it just has to do with like nostalgia and how things originally were with the old host. People were a little bit skeptical of having just a new host in general. But
hmm
people once they watched a little bit of the show and saw he was Filipino, people were celebrating for that because it was like, hey, this cool guy, he's Filipino and he's on a show that I used to watch as a child. That's pretty cool.
Yeah,
So shout out to
good for
him.
him. You're listening to this. Congratulations. But yeah, the original host was a white guy, right? I'm
hmm
looking at it right now. Someone named Steve Burns.
hmm
Shout out to Steve Burns if you're watching this too.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's kind of interesting because with that character, they weren't explicitly a certain type of person anyway.
hmm
So having someone that was Filipino or of a different identity wouldn't really affect the show at all, right? Like
Exactly.
it wasn't really part of the show in the first place.
hmm It's funny. I saw a TikTok of someone who was watching because their kid was watching Blue's Clues, and it was the new host.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm assuming that they had watched Blue's Clues as a kid. So the video was just being like, they were like, oh, let's see what this new host is all about. Like, I can't believe they changed the OG. And then like it skips, and the guy is like midway into the episode, and he's like, hell yeah, this new host is so cool. Pretty funny.
Yeah, that's I think that's really good though, because a lot of the times when you have childhood shows that get rebooted or they make a change to it a few years later or many years later, people get concerned because even though they don't necessarily watch it today, if it's quote unquote ruined, then it in a sense I don't want to say it affects their childhood because their childhood already like passed,
Yeah.
but it's it's similar to how when you have I don't know, Winx Club or shows like that they make a live action for, and then people see the costume or they see that they make it completely different
Yeah.
from the original intent or the aesthetic of it.
Mhm.
Like you bring up TikTok, I remember there were a lot of people that were mad about Winx Club and other shows like that, and they made TikTok saying what I would dress up as if I could play this character, or like what the
Yeah.
outfit should look like.
Mhm.
And the thing that I was gonna say before is that I didn't know that Blue's Clues wasn't a Canadian show. It's actually an American show.
Oh shoot, is it?
Yeah, right? And
Damn
it
it.
kind of has become this running thing throughout my life that many things that I thought were exclusively Canadian or maybe Asian Canadian or something just weren't at
Yeah.
all.
Damn it.
And I mean, for example, when Rihanna and I were talking about this episode in particular and planning for it, we were throwing up names of shows that we used to watch, and we looked them up, and it turned out they weren't Canadian. For example,
Mhm.
Ni Hao Kai Lan, Sagwa, the Chinese Siamese cat. Those two aren't Canadian at all. Well, they were broadcast in America and Canada. And I mean, with Ni Hao Kai Lan, I think it was a Nickelodeon show. Hang on, give me a second. Neo Kylan was a Nickelodeon show, and Nickelodeon is American. Yes? Yes.
Yes.
Nickelodeon Studios is American.
And
Yeah, and I mean, it's not necessarily a bad thing that these shows weren't Canadian. It's just that, I don't know, the feeling of surprise or the realization that something that you thought was
was
Asian Canadian or
mm,
had more of a connection to you in a sense,
mm,
knowing that it actually didn't, like hurts a
exactly.
little bit.
It's weird because those shows in particular just felt like they were only shown in Canada. I don't know how to describe it, but it didn't feel like it would be shown in America.
Hmm.
And there's no reason. It's just that that's what it felt like.
I kind of understand that because if you were to ask someone to guess where SpongeBob was from, they probably wouldn't say Canada.
Yeah.
But with something like Neo Kai Lan, I don't know, it just felt Canadian.
Yeah, it did. It really did.
And it turned out it didn't. Oh my god, actually, I have a very short tangent about Neo Kai Lan.
Yes.
Growing up, my classmates, they obviously saw it too, like my non-Asian classmates, because it's on Nickelodeon, which is a mainstream channel.
Mm.
And they used to make like these weird comments, and they weren't inherently racist or anything, but it's because Ni Hao Kai Lan and I technically did have a direct connection because we're both Chinese.
Mm.
They would make these weird comparison comments of being like, "Hey, have you seen Ni Hao Kai Lan? Is she like your sister?" I don't. There's like weird things to say, and I mean, I don't know. It's like things that aren't inherently racist, but they feel racist. They make you feel some way.
Yeah, it's like a weird microaggression, but not really.
Yeah, I never know the line. Sometimes I
Yeah.
think, am I overreacting? Which usually when people are that aware that they think they might be overreacting, they probably aren't because they're being
Mm.
hyper aware or something.
Yeah.
Yeah. Have you ever had an experience like that? People, because
Um,
in we didn't really have many Filipino shows like
no.
Asian American or like Filipino Canadian shows. But did you ever have any comparisons like that? Because you did say that people, even today, still think you're Chinese.
Yeah, so because of that, everyone thinks I'm some sort of East Asian. So pretty much any like cartoon that we see on TV or in a movie that was just like a small like East Asian girl, people would compare me to that.
Mhm.
So yeah, people have called me Ni Hao Kai Lan, even though I don't know. I guess people just thought I looked like her, which I don't really typically. Personally, I don't think I look like her, but I'm trying to think of like specifically. Usually, like what I get on the street is that if I was with my mom, like on the bus, and they would see another Filipino lady, they'd say, "Oh, your kid looks like a Japanese doll," or "Your kid
Um,
looks like a Korean doll," or "Your kid looks like a Chinese doll," and yeah, that's what I would get a lot.
I don't know if sensitive is the right word, but I'm sensitive to Asian girls being referred to as dolls
Oh yeah, 100%.
because it just starts going down a different route, you know?
Yeah. I mean, it kind of makes sense because I was really short, but at the same
Uh-huh.
time, like, that's weird.
Yeah, I mean, you don't really say that about girls of other ethnicities. Like, you don't
Yeah,
see
no.
a. I. It's possible, but I've never really heard a white girl be called, hey, she looks like an American girl doll.
Yeah, exactly. We just realized that Timothy Goes to School is Canadian, and on Wikipedia, it's like considered a Chinese Canadian animated series, which we did
Hmm.
not know.
Yes, we did not. And it makes a lot more sense now.
Yeah, it really does. Because I remember, we both vividly remember an episode where there was a Japanese character. Which, okay, wait. First of all, Timothy Goes to School is just a bunch of animals.
Hmm.
And I guess some of them had like very specific ethnicities, which
Yeah, I
is,
guess so.
yeah. Because, okay, so Timothy is just a raccoon,
Hmm.
but he doesn't have like he's not specifically any ethnicity, but the best friend of Timothy named Yoko is a gray tabby cat who's originally from Japan. And we both vividly remember an episode where they were sharing things at school, and Yoko brought like a matcha whisk and was tap passing around like a little a little thing of like tea, I think it was.
Yeah, I think so. This was one of the episodes that, I mean, you just brought it up. We both vividly remembered it. And I told my parents about this. This generally was one of my favorite shows because the aesthetic of it, having all these cute animals go to school, and it was a relatively wholesome show, too. I
Hmm.
mean, you think about a childhood show like Arthur,
Yeah.
and I like there were a lot of memes about how Arthur in one episode tried to beat up his sister.
Yeah.
And then if you compare it to this show, like a whole other level. It's so wholesome.
Hmm.
Man, I love the song from that show too. And going back to what Rihanna said about it saying that it's Canadian Chinese, it says that the country of origin is Canada and Hong Kong. And the show is available in both English and Chinese. I'm assuming they probably meant Mandarin, Cantonese, or a different dialect.
Hmm.
I imagine maybe it's Cantonese because that's the more widely spoken Chinese dialect in Hong Kong. But there you have it.
This is crazy.
I love Timothy Goes to School. Everyone, your homework tonight. I
I'm
don't care
watching.
if you're 20 years graduated out of any school. Your homework tonight is to listen to It's a Brand New Day from Timothy Goes to School and binge watch this show wherever you can find it.
Jeez. I like how we didn't really think about the show because we just both thought it was American at first. I
Yeah,
didn't
I
even
mean,
search it up.
we threw up so many shows during research, and they all said that they were American. And so we at that point we kind of not gave up. We mentioned this on the show. This ended up being a joke in itself about how we couldn't find Asian Canadian shows. But
Mm.
then it turns out one of the ones we really liked actually was Canadian. Look at us. Or I guess look at them. Adding on to our revelation that Timothy Goes to School is an Asian Canadian show, George Shrinks is actually another Asian Canadian show. If you're unfamiliar with it, the plot basically follows this boy named George that is extremely tiny. And when I say tiny, I mean the same size as a household object. And I had just randomly remembered this because in my memory, I like in my mind, I remember the characters looking Asian, if that makes sense. And so, since we were having this whole revelation, I'm like, whoa, Timothy Goes to School is Asian. I looked up George Shrink, and it says that it's Chinese Canadian.
This is crazy.
I know. Although, one thing I have to say, I don't know if I want to call it criticism at all, is that a lot of these Asian Canadian shows that we watch or remember watching, and I say Asian Canadians as in like excluding Neo Kylan and everything because those are naturally Canadian.
Mm-hmm.
Most of these shows it said they aired on PBS or channels like that. And obviously these aren't bad channels at all. However, if you think of, for example, today you have PBS and then maybe you have Disney Channel or something. And why is it that these shows were aired on the public, everyone could access, in a sense, like the poor kid channels, and not on the cable television channels as well? Because I don't think that these shows should just be on some channel that only people that have cable or whatever can watch. But at the same time, it does give you something to think about that they were on the quote unquote poor kid channel.
True.
I mean, in a way, it's more accessible because it's on PBS, but at the same time, no one I know that didn't have to watch PBS had watched PBS.
Yeah.
So there you have it. We got some niche, very. It's like a. What is it called? Unburied memory? There was a term for it that people came up with on social media.
We're unlocking memories.
Yeah, something like that. Well, there you have it. You have some shows to watch or research and reminisce about being an Asian in Canada. Or if you're not an Asian from Canada, then, immerse yourself in the. It's like those rare aesthetic videos.
Yeah,
Growing up
literally.
as an growing up as an Asian Canadian.
Going back to what we said about not really knowing that some of these shows were actually Asian Canadian, there are a lot of public figures that the general public don't really know are Asian Canadian. For example, Sandra Oh or Keanu Reeves. Because they generally just moved to the US because of Hollywood and stuff like that, which is kind of sad.
Yeah, I totally agree because, I mean, as a whole, Canada doesn't really have the same film industry as the US. It's because, I mean, if you think about it, it's like Canada doesn't have something like Bollywood or anything like that where they could thrive on their own in a sense, which is why a lot of these people end up going to the US, which is understandable but at the same time kind of sad because people don't know that these celebrities are really Canadian until it's brought up as maybe a fun fact. They see it on their Wikipedia page, and sometimes you just really never end up finding out because being from Canada isn't exactly. I'm not sure how to explain it. It's just that when someone says, "Oh, I'm from Australia," or "I'm from this place," people get more excited.
Yeah.
Like, "Oh, you're from Canada?"
Yeah, no one really knows about Canada's achievements. Not that there are a lot anyways, but
Yeah.
it's sad because there was like a significant step forward, I guess, for like just Asian Canadians in general because of Kim's Convenience.
Mm-hmm.
Then they canceled it.
That was short-lived. I mean, not necessarily short-lived, but it was short-lived in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah.
And I mean, if you're on social media, you'll see that there's even a lot of conflict about things that happen behind the scenes on the show, which I'm not going to get into because
Yeah.
that's not what this episode is about, and it's really complicated.
Yeah.
Like what we just said earlier, people don't really know of Asian Canadian actors or shows. And then you have an Asian Canadian show that's a live action and it's not a cartoon, and then it gets canceled.
Yeah, exactly. It's always like it feels like there's a lot of hype building up and it feels like we're building up to something really big or like a big step forward or change. And then all of a sudden the next thing that comes out about the show is that it's canceled.
Yeah, and a fun thing about the show was that there were Asian Canadian actors as well. It wasn't just, hey, we're having an Asian Canadian show with a bunch of Americans.
Yeah.
And then it's gone, unfortunately.
Right. One step forward, 10 steps back. That's what it feels like, at least.
Yeah. And going back to what we said earlier about people not knowing of any public figures that are Asian Canadian or from Canada in general, because it's not that exciting, there are some Asian idols or like K-pop stars that are Canadian as well. For example, yeah, Mark from NCT, Wendy from Red Velvet, Chris Wu, Henry. Someone I know actually saw Henry in Chinatown.
Oh, shoot.
Yeah, they met Henry in Harry Styles. They met Henry in Chinatown. It was really interesting.
It's really cool. Oh, yeah, even Kevin and Jacob from The Boys. I remember I went to there's like a K-pop store, like or just like memorabilia store downtown Toronto. And the person who works there, I think she's one of the owners, she was talking about how like she knew Jacob's ex-girlfriend because he grew up in Toronto.
That's interesting.
Yeah, and I remember being like, that's very specific, but that's pretty cool.
It's an interesting thing to tell a stranger.
Yeah, it really is.
Because how do you tell someone that?
Yeah,
Like
it
no
was
judgment.
very looking back at it, it was pretty out of like pocket because I think I was just looking or passing by like because it was when the boys first debuted. So I was just passing by an album and she was like, "Oh, like I know his ex-girlfriend from when he lived here and was in high school here." It's like, "Oh, thank you for telling me that, I guess." I think she kind of counts, but Somi, she used to be in IOI. Is that what it's called? IOI?
Yes.
Okay. Her dad is Canadian or Dutch Canadian. He's also kind of a celebrity now that I think about it.
Yeah, he went on a couple of shows with her. It's interesting how like this isn't even related to the Asian Canadian thing, but it's interesting how sometimes the parent or sibling somehow end up getting some of that spotlight.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true.
Because there's a lot of Asian variety shows that are like, oh, talking to the dad, or shows about daily life or like living
Yeah.
somewhere or living in general or like living with our parents. And then you end up watching some celebrity chilling with their parents every day.
Yeah.
And going back to what I said about how being from Canada isn't that exciting, I mean, if you watch those variety shows, like for example, Korean variety shows, where they find out that someone from Australia, they might like ask them questions about Australia, and it's more likely that they know things about Australia or America. But if they say, "Oh, you're from Canada," Like, what are they supposed to say? Have you seen the CN Tower before?
Yeah. I think whenever they ask if they're from Canada, the next question is just, so you speak English?
Yeah. No, I don't.
Yeah, no.
I speak Spanish. I mean, you can speak Spanish, but you get my point. I think it'd be interesting if someone might be this out there that we don't know of, but if there was a K-pop idol that was from Quebec.
That would be cool.
I think that would be an interesting fact for the variety show host to find out.
Mm.
Like, oh, did you speak English? Like, nah, man, I spoke French.
Yeah, or just like any French-speaking area in Canada.
Mm,
That would be really cool.
that'd be kind of interesting. If you're a trainee and you're listening to this,
Please.
hit us up when you debut. Let us know. Or not. I mean, your contract probably won't let you.
Yeah. Going back to what we were saying, just how, when a celebrity's from Canada or Asian celebrity is from Canada, it's not really that exciting to people. The same thing really goes for just Asian Canadians as a whole. Like, we just really aren't recognized as specifically Asian and Canadian. It's mainly just we're lumped in with Asian Americans,
Yeah, totally. And with Asian Pacific Heritage Month and how it's recognized with the government, there still is a really awkward tension or just some like iffiness
Mm-hmm.
because the government has yet to talk much about this dark history with Asian Canadians, which we mentioned in episode 11. So if you want to learn a bit about that,
Mm-hmm.
listen to the episode.
Just a disclaimer, we are 100% not trying to play quote unquote oppression Olympics in this segment because Asian Canadians haven't really endured the same struggles as the Indigenous community specifically. And there has been a lot going on. Just to bring up an example, there was like how do I explain this? There were recent findings in what used to be a residential school of, I think it was around 200, I believe.
250.
250 bodies of children, like children's remains, were found in what used to be a residential school.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm pretty sure not. I've heard some news stories about this, but I haven't really seen. I'm not sure if this is credible, but there has been in Manitoba, people are saying that another 100 bodies were found near what used to be a residential school as well.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah.
Yeah, I mean it's it's really complicated. And I don't mean complicated in the sense like, oh, this is like a hassle to talk about. It's really complicated because Canada has such a dark history with its varying ethnic groups because everyone knows there's a whole stereotype like, oh, Canadians are nice, but like Canadians aren't really nice in that sense at all, especially with the government.
Mm-hmm.
And Canada has an extremely long way to go with acknowledging its past and its wrongdoing to, like the Asian community, the Indigenous community, the Black community. And with residential schools, I mean, the last one was closed officially in 1996. And so it's not really surprising at all that these people that were fighting so hard for justice for the people that had experienced and survived or had not survived residential schools, that they had recently discovered remains because I mean Canada's whole thing is sweeping things under the rug, so it's not a surprise. It doesn't come as a surprise that there were all these quote unquote hidden things,
Yeah.
if that makes sense.
Mm.
And another recent development is that Ryerson University, this is considered one of the top or more popular post-secondary schools in Canada. People are calling for the school to be renamed, as well as have the statue be taken down. The statue has since already been taken down by force through protest, and they they knocked it over. They knocked off the head, and they threw the statue in Lake Ontario. And also, the reason why people are calling for it to be renamed, as well as having that statue removed, which already was removed, is because Ryerson is named after someone named Egerton Ryerson, who isn't. This person isn't even someone that was vaguely associated with residential schools. This person was the one that invented the residential school system. Historically, this is the person that invented it. It's because of him that residential schools came to be and were put in place, because he planned everything. He wrote out everything, and if it wasn't, I mean, I don't mean that if it wasn't for him they wouldn't exist, because there was still the notion that they wanted to get the Indigenous out of the child. But he is the sole creator, or the one that wrote it in the book, in that sense.
Yeah, Canada's history is pretty much based off of all these terrible things that the government has done, like especially to the Indigenous community. And it's so, like, I hate when people call it like history, because that makes it sound like it's in the like far past, right?
Yeah.
When Indigenous schools, the last one was closed in late 1990s, I guess. That is not that far away from right now.
I totally agree, because the issue with calling it history, even though it technically was something that happened in the past, is that its effects are still felt today, and there are certain things that happened in the past that are still being done today. And so calling it history is, in a sense, pushing it back. It's like how people say, oh, slavery was such a long time ago, but it really wasn't.
No.
And so what if it was a long time ago? Its effects are still felt today.
Exactly.
And so, like we said in episode 11 with Asian Canadian history, and also what we've been saying throughout the episode about how the Canadian government hasn't really acknowledged its wrongdoings and the struggles of specific ethnic groups, those struggles being caused by the government. During Asian Pacific Heritage Month, I apologize, the government of Canada, they kind of rebranded the website. Well, not the whole website, but they created this banner, these posters for Asian Pacific Heritage Month, and I can throw up the poster and probably a screenshot from the website. The overall look of this aesthetic is a kind of dark teal mixed with like navy blue, and then you have this gold design with what looks like in the middle, it's like a lily pad, I think.
Yeah.
Do you think it's a lily pad?
Like a lotus flower.
And this whole design, it's not ugly or bad at all. The issue that I mainly have with it is that it looks very East Asian, and Asian Pacific Heritage Month, also Asians as a whole, does not just consist of East Asians. And I mean, they didn't even write Asian Pacific Heritage Month. They just wrote Asian Heritage Month, which is why I said it wrong just now. So yeah, let's erase Pacific Islanders, I guess.
Yeah. Bye.
And if you look at this page, we're gonna have it in the description. We also use this in episode 11 when we're talking about how they handled Asian Canadian history. A lot of the information on this page is what we talked about before, and they didn't really update anything. They basically just kind of threw a banner over it. And there's also another page called Noteworthy Canadians of Asian Origin. This was also one that had basically already existed. A lot of the people mentioned here, Patrick Chan, let me see, Rupi Kaur, these people were already mentioned on this page. And it just feels very lazy because it's being shown as if it's a new page, but it was already there before.
Yeah.
Because the thing is, if you look at the website, these things are now under Asian Heritage Month, but it wasn't like that before. So it says noteworthy Canadians of Asian descent - Asian Heritage Month. It seems like this is a new page or just like a new edition for Asian Pacific Heritage Month, but it's not really at all.
Yeah. It's the equivalent to when a company comes out with a new product, but it's the same, like, basically the same stuff, so they just
Just
put
say
a
Apple.
label, like a different label on the outside.
Just say Apple.
Oh, God.
I mean, what?
What? Who said that?
What's Apple? But yeah, it's just very lazy. I don't see why. I mean, I get it in a sense that, oh, okay, maybe you already had some of this information on the website before, even though it might not necessarily be the best written, the best worded, since some of it's written in the sense that, oh, unfortunately, insert amount of this ethnic group passed away because they were killed by the government. They make it seem like they don't have anything to do with it. Yeah. And one thing we criticize really heavily, I apologize for mentioning episode 11 over and over again, we criticize the fact that in the Filipino section, they said, oh, currently there are like Filipino newspapers, magazines, which is the most blanket statement because that's for every ethnic group. It still says that.
Of course.
It still says, and I'm going to read it, currently there are a variety of Filipino associations across Canada that foster and participate in community festivals and civic celebrations. Canadians of Filipino descent have also established newspapers, magazines, as well as TV and radio stations. I'm reading it how they probably want me to.
Yeah, it's very minimalist effort.
Yeah, I don't. What does this mean? I still don't know what this means.
Like, why did you tell us that? Like, thank you, but like what?
Yeah, what exactly am I supposed to get from that? You know, if you're gonna say something like that, maybe say, "Oh, a very popular TV show," you know, something like that. You know, like if you, I mean, you already only took 2 minutes. Just what's another minute?
Exactly.
Whoever wrote this, or whatever group wrote this, I just want to talk. I just want to meet up and have a civil conversation.
Yeah, who did
and
this?
criticize you very heavily. Because I mean, I'm no historian, but I guess the thing with this page is that you can tell that they added a little bit of information, and it's not 100% what it was before. However, it's just that I don't know. At the very least, they could have also corrected some of this wording. The whole unfortunately, because it just takes away responsibility. I mean, you're the government. What do you mean, unfortunately? It's like when Justin Trudeau, people were criticizing him for that statement he made during the climate strike. Someone said something like, "We're all in this together. We have to fight this." Yeah. And then someone said, "Man, you're the one in charge. What do you mean you have to fight this? You can just change it." I just have a weird relationship with politicians, but I imagine that's how it is for a lot of people as well.
My gosh. I'm reading the Canadians of East Asian descent section, and there's a section that says apology in the House of Commons based on like specific to head taxes.
Oh yeah.
And it's literally one sentence, and it just says on June 22nd, 2006, The government of Canada apologized in the House of Commons to Canadians of Chinese descent who paid the head tax, their families, and Chinese communities across Canada. Thank you.
What do you
That's
mean
the
you apologize? That's the thing.
exactly.
I acknowledge that the government apologizing publicly has some sort of effect because they acknowledge the issue, which they should have done in the first place.
Mhm.
However, the problem with just walking up to the parliament, walking up to the White House, walking up to wherever, holding a piece of paper and saying, we at the government of Canada apologize to the Chinese community, or we as the government of Canada apologize to the Indigenous community. But what are you doing? Where's the long-term change?
Exactly.
Where's the action item? You can't just say I'm so. What do you mean you're sorry? You killed people. You ruined many people's lives. You ruined many generations' lives. And I don't even mean generations as in a specific family. I mean like you ruined generations of people.
Mm-hmm.
At the very least, do something.
Mm.
Because the whole thing with the government and with elections in general, it's like, hey, I want to enact change. We're going to change some policy. We're going to do this, do that.
Exactly.
But the
Like
thing is,
why?
you can't just apologize. I mean, okay, I'm sorry for like for example, if you had like Justin Trudeau say something like, "Oh, I apologize on behalf of the government of Canada because of the residential schools and the violence that occurred there." Okay, you're sorry, and what?
Exactly. Like you can't say you're sorry. Like, you can't apologize for something and then not follow up with we're going to be doing this to change or this to like atone for everything. You can't just say sorry and then leave.
Mm-hmm. And
It's like
actually, yes.
it's just like a slap to the face, I would say.
Mm-hmm. And speaking of the government giving empty words or things that just genuinely don't do much slash anger the general public. Very recently, there was an act of terrorism in London, Ontario, where a white boy he essentially killed a Muslim family. And Doug Ford, who is the premier of Ontario, because it happened in London, Ontario, when he was at the visual, is that how you pronounce the word?
Vigil, yeah.
Yeah, okay. Apologize. When he was at the vigil, he had to practically be forced by the crowd to acknowledge it as an act of terrorism. He wasn't going
Yeah.
to say terrorism. You can find videos where he was probably going to say act of violence or act of some other lighter word.
Mm-hmm.
And the crowd was saying, terrorism, call it terrorism. It was terrorism. And he made this defeated face and like sighed internally and said it was an act of terrorism. And then people were like, okay, finally. And the thing is, it really shocks. I mean, it doesn't shock me, but the thing that it shocks me how it's so hard to even get an apology. And the thing is, an apology isn't even what these people need. Because an apology doesn't guarantee change, right? It's like what we were saying how, okay, you can apologize for head taxes, but what are you going to do about it? Like, how are
Exactly.
you going to prevent something like this happening again? Because, like, isn't there that saying, if we don't acknowledge history, we're bound to repeat it?
Yeah.
Just because we don't have head taxes today doesn't mean there isn't a different version of head taxes or something else that could come to be.
Exactly. Just apologizing and like verbally and then just leaving. I understand that, it's baby steps, I guess. Like it's one step closer to change. But just apologizing and then doing nothing else is the equivalent to doing nothing.
Yeah, actions speak louder than words.
Exactly.
I hate to be the person that's like bringing all these sayings or whatever, but they do. What are you gonna?
Yeah.
At the end of the day, we can only hope. And when I say hope that things will get better, I don't mean the stereotypical whole like thoughts and prayers and nothing else. we can only hope that having like these conversations and having other activists talk about it, as well as educating people on various issues that had occurred / are occurring, can bring on some sense or force of change. Because with Canada specifically, since we're Canadians, so I don't want to speak too much on the other countries, everything is so slow.
Yeah, for real.
Like, I'm not trying to be funny here, but even with something like the TTC in Canada, it took us forever to start getting those like subway cards that you can add money to and like charge.
Yeah.
And so I don't know, maybe in a few years or just I really hope it doesn't have to come to something really bad happening. Not
Yeah.
that I mean, there's so many bad things that are already happening / have happened, but I really hope that it doesn't have to come to like something extremely grave or like graver, that there's the slightest bit of change.
Mm-hmm.
Well, as we close this episode, we'd like to give a little shout out / thank our Asian Canadian listeners. Thank you for everyone. Thank you for tuning in today, and leave a comment down below, and feel free to DM us if you're from Canada. Maybe share your experiences with being Asian Canadian. Maybe talk about some shows that you enjoyed growing up. Did you know that George Ranks was Asian Canadian? Did you know that Timothy goes to school Chinese Canadian? I mean, it makes a lot more sense now, but we didn't realize at first. Did you know that Keanu Reeves was from Toronto? Did you watch Kim's Convenience before it was canceled? I mean, you can still watch it, but did you watch it before it was canceled? Feel free to share all of that with us, and much more. Sounds like an ad.
Well, if you guys like this episode and want to stay connected with us, check out our website in the description. It contains links to our streaming platforms such as Spotify, Anchor, Apple Podcasts, and more. Follow us for more behind-the-scenes content, announcements, and other random things we decide to put on there.
See you next time.
Bye!